My name is Cam Edle, and I'm doing the space race from 1957 to 1963. After World War II, two major powers emerged, the Communist Soviet Union and the Democratic United States of America. These two powers entered into a 45-year-long Cold War to see who could gain technological and societal dominance over the other. One of the biggest competitions they had started back during World War II when the Nazis developed a ballistic missile. But once the Nazi Party was finally defeated, many of the priceless rocket scientists were recruited by both the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States recruited the best of the best from the Germans, Wernher von Braun. He was the man who developed the V-2 ballistic missile, which shredded thousands of civilians in London and was the first large-scale liquid propellant rocket vehicle. Meanwhile, Ukrainian-born Sergei Korolev was the leader for the Soviet Union. This kind of shows us how the space race came to be and why it was born out of this search for missile technology. And though the USA seemed to be in the lead scientifically with their dramatic ending to World War II, the Soviets celebrated their first victory with the launch of Sputnik 1 in October 1957. The Sputnik 1 satellite was about a 2-foot diameter sphere with 4 8-foot-long antennas sticking out to the sides. The satellite emitted a radio signal back to Earth for 3 weeks before its batteries ran out. It then continued to orbit the Earth for about 2 months until it fell back into the atmosphere on January 4th, 1958. The signal emitted by Sputnik 1 could be heard by just an average person's radio. The Soviets then celebrated a second victory when they launched Sputnik 2, carrying a dog named Lakaya into space. They became the first nation to successfully send a living organism into orbit, and this was a major step for space travel, to see if a living organism could even survive the thrust and g-forces of getting to space. And though Lakaya was not able to return to Earth, she provided valuable information on what was needed to do next in order to create a safe return home. Lakaya was a street dog from Moscow, and she was chosen because of her built-up resistance to cold and starvation, which allowed for a longer research time on her vitals as she entered the negative 455 degree space. On January 1st, 1958, the U.S. entered the space race by launching Explorer 1, the first U.S. satellite to reach orbit. It carried experimental equipment that led to the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belt. Picture here is Wernher von Braun with the Explorer 1 satellite. This was groundbreaking for science because it was the first man-made satellite carrying technology for research. The USA and President Eisenhower then announced on October 1st, 1958, the formation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or more commonly known as NASA. This replaced the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, and this transformation increased funding for projects as well as increased transparency in the new developments, while allowing for more public support. Eisenhower believed a civilian agency would be more effective than assigning space to the military, where rivalries had already demonstrated a halting in the results of the satellites. The USA and NASA shortly after achieved another victory when on December 18th of 1958 they launched SCORE, the world's first communications satellite. It captured the world's attention and most importantly the Soviet Union's by broadcasting a pre-recorded Christmas message from President Eisenhower, which became the first broadcast of a human voice from space. The USSR responded later that year by launching Luna 1, known as the first cosmic rocket. It gets this name because it accidentally escaped the orbit of the Moon and Earth due to going too fast, meaning its intended flight path had been to impact with the Moon and to study its magnetic field, but was going too fast and blew right past it. It is now permanently orbiting the Sun between Earth and Mars. So accidentally, Luna 1 became the first man-made object to leave the orbit of the Earth and orbit the Sun instead. On October 2nd, 1959, the USA launched Explorer 6. On board was the world's first weather satellite, and it captured the first pictures of Earth from space. Luna 2 was launched on September 12, 1959, and accomplished its mission of creating the first spacecraft to reach the surface of the moon. They then, less than a month after, launched Luna 3, and succeeded of their mission of sending an object to orbit around the moon and photographing the far side of the moon. But after only making minor advances with their previous test flights, the Soviets celebrated a major victory with the successful launch and return of Sputnik 5. Sputnik 5 was accompanied by the first animals, Belka and Strelka. They were two dogs from Moscow, and a range of plants that were returned from space. The Soviets extended their lead over the United States. On April 12, 1961, aboard the Vostok 1, Yuri Gagarin made a single orbit around the Earth and became the first man to reach space. He remained in space for 1 hour and 48 minutes before landing in what is now Western Russia. The United States, feeling the pressure to respond to Soviet success, achieved the first pilot-controlled journey and the first American in space with Alan Shepard aboard the Mercury spacecraft Freedom 7. The flight only lasted about 15 minutes, but would spark the eye and attention of one of the most famous presidents in U.S. history, John F. Kennedy. Because not too long after, he gave his famous speech to Rice University about the future of the U.S. and NASA. One of his most famous quotes from that speech was, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and to do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." When Kennedy said this in 1962, the USA was not close to sending a man to the moon, and they had only recently been able to send one into orbit for 15 minutes, let alone the 4 days it would take to do a moon mission. This leads us into how the United States knew the Soviet Union was far ahead of them technologically, and that they are going to need some bold claims and unwavering public support. Public support was key for the United States because without it, the program would quickly lose funding and all the momentum it had just built in the last decade. The Soviets, however, didn't really need public support because they could keep their operations much more secretive, which was likely the reason that they had as much early success as they did. These first 7 years of the space race started a new chapter in human history and has given us a lot of modern technologies we depend on today. From 1957 to 1963, we saw an explosion. Generally, in the lead was the Soviet Union, but Kennedy's speech seemed to be a turning point for America because they landed 6 missions on the moon in the years to come, and would turn into the global superpower that they are still today. I think that the space race was about more than just the search for better rockets and missiles. I believe that it was about doing the impossible, inspiring some of the smartest human beings to ever come together and strive for something that has never been done, to go to space. Thank you. That's my speech.